The restaurant was loud, filled with the smell of expensive steak and the sound of clinking glasses. We were celebrating my daughter Maya's elementary school promotion. My husband Mark sat next to me looking proud. Across from us were his parents, Evelyn and Arthur. They always acted like they ruled the family. Evelyn reached under the table and pulled out a massive box wrapped in glittering gold paper. She slid it toward Maya with a sharp, thin smile. Maya's eyes went wide. She ripped the paper open to find a large, high-tech robotic doll. It was beautiful, with realistic hair and eyes that seemed to follow you. The rest of the family started to applaud, cheering for Maya's big achievement. But as Maya touched the doll's hand, the cheering died down in my ears. My daughter didn't jump for joy. She didn't say thank you. Instead, she froze completely. Her small hands gripped the plastic tightly, and her face went pale. The light seemed to vanish from her eyes. She stopped laughing. She stopped moving. She just stared at the doll in total, haunting silence. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I looked at her. Something was terribly wrong, but everyone else kept clapping like everything was perfect. "Maya, honey, aren't you going to say thank you?" I asked, leaning forward. My voice sounded thin in the crowded room. Maya didn't even blink. She just held that doll against her chest like a shield. Evelyn let out a short, annoyed laugh and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Clara," she said, looking at me with cold eyes. "She's just overstimulated. It's a big day for a little girl." Mark nodded quickly, reaching over to pat his mother's hand. "Mom's right. She's just tired from the ceremony. Let her be." I felt a knot of frustration in my stomach. My daughter wasn't just tired, she looked terrified. Even when the food arrived, Maya refused to let go of the toy. She wouldn't pick up her fork. She wouldn't look at her cake. That night when we got home, the silence continued. I tucked her into bed, and she crawled under the covers with the doll pressed hard against her heart. As I kissed her forehead, I saw her lips moving. She was whispering to the toy, but the words were too quiet to hear. I stood in the doorway, watching her. Just as I turned to leave, I heard a faint, metallic clicking sound coming from the dark room. The next morning, the house felt heavy. Maya walked into the kitchen like a ghost, the doll still tucked under her arm. She sat at the table and stared at her cereal. I decided I had to see what was going on. "Maya, let me see your new friend for a second," I said, reaching for the toy. Maya flinched violently, pulling the doll away as if I were trying to hurt her. Her reaction was so sudden it made me gasp. I watched her closely. I noticed that whenever I mentioned the words school or secret, the doll's eyes seemed to flicker with a tiny blue light. It wasn't a normal light. Felt intentional. I told Mark about it later that afternoon. He groaned, rubbing his face. "Clara, you're projecting your own trauma onto a plastic toy. My parents spend a fortune on that. Stop trying to find problems where there are none." He walked away, leaving me standing in the hallway feeling like I was losing my mind. I went into the living room where Maya had left the doll on the sofa for a brief moment. As I stepped toward it, the doll's head suddenly snapped toward me. It turned all by itself, and a low hum started to vibrate from its chest. The silence at home was one thing, but school was another. Maya's teacher, Mrs. Gable, called me that afternoon. Her voice sounded worried. "Clara, is everything okay at home? Maya hasn't spoken a single word all day. She usually leads the class discussions." My heart sank. Maya was a confident, outspoken girl who loved to tell stories. Now she was a statue. Mrs. Gable told me that Maya spent all of recess sitting on a bench, clutching the doll and refusing to play with her friends. I picked Maya up early. When we got into the car, I tried to talk to her. "Maya, did something happen? You can tell me anything." She just looked out the window, her jaw set tight. She wouldn't even look at me. I felt like there was a wall between us that hadn't been there 2 days ago. As we pulled into the driveway, Mrs. Gable's final comment echoed in my head. She said that during nap time, she saw Maya leaning over the doll, whispering something disturbing. Maya had told the doll. "I'm being good, I promise I won't tell." I looked at my daughter in the rearview mirror. She looked like a prisoner in her own skin, guarded by a piece of plastic. I spent the rest of the day trying to get Maya to open up. Finally, while we were drawing together, she leaned in close. Her voice was a tiny, shaky breath. "Grandma says secrets are special, Mommy. If I tell, the doll gets sad." I felt like someone had dumped ice water down my back. I called Evelyn immediately. She answered on the second ring, her voice sweet and sugary. "Oh, Clara. How is our little princess enjoying her gift?" When I told her what Maya said, the sweetness vanished. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, her voice turning sharp. "You're clearly stressed. Maybe you should take a nap and stop making up stories." She hung up before I could argue. When Mark came home, I told him what Maya had confessed. He didn't even look up from his phone. "She's a kid, Clara. They imagine things. Mom would never do anything to hurt Maya." He walked into the kitchen to kiss his mother, who had apparently decided to drop by unannounced. I stood in the hallway, watching them through the crack in the door. I noticed something then that made my blood run cold. Evelyn wasn't looking at Mark. She was staring directly at Maya, watching her every move with a strange, hungry intensity. I couldn't sleep. The house was dead quiet, except for the pounding of my heart. At 2 a.m., I crept into Maya's room. She was fast asleep, but her grip on the doll was still firm. I slowly, carefully pried it from her arms. She stirred but didn't wake up. I took the toy into my home office and locked the door. Under the bright desk lamp, the doll looked more sinister. I felt like a crazy person, but I grabbed a small screwdriver. I began to examine the seams. Near the base of the neck, I found a tiny hidden latch that didn't appear in any of the online manuals I had searched for earlier. Popped it open. My breath hitched. Hidden deep inside the plastic shell was a small black box. It wasn't a toy part. It was a high-end recording device and a GPS tracker, illegally modified to fit inside the doll. There were wires soldered into the doll's microphone and eyes. This wasn't a mistake from the factory. Someone had spent a lot of time and money to turn this toy into a spy. I felt sick to my stomach. I realized there were memory cards inside. I plugged the card into my laptop, and my screen filled with hundreds of audio files. I put on my headphones and clicked the first file. The sound was crystal clear. It was Evelyn's voice. She was whispering to Maya, but it sounded like a threat. "Remember, Maya, this doll is our little secret. If you tell your mommy anything we talk about, she'll get very angry. You don't want mommy to be angry, do you?" I listened to recording after recording. Evelyn was coaching my daughter, telling her exactly what to say and what to keep hidden. She told Maya that I was unstable, and that only Grandma could be trusted. She even warned the poor child that the doll was watching to make sure she didn't lie. I felt a wave of pure rage. This was psychological abuse. I looked at the doorway expecting Mark to be there, but the house remained silent. I played a file from that afternoon. I heard Mark's voice in the background. He was laughing while his mother told Maya to keep their special game going. He knew the toy had extra features, but he didn't care. Then I hid a file labeled with today's date. I heard Evelyn's voice mention a specific location, a law office downtown. She was talking to someone about a final move to protect the child. I didn't stop at the audio. I opened the GPS tracking data. My hands were shaking as I scrolled through the map. The doll had been tracking Maya every single second. It showed her path to school, her time on the playground, her visits to the pediatrician, and even our private time in the backyard. Every single movement my daughter made was being uploaded to a private cloud server. I realized this wasn't just a grandmother being overbearing. This was a calculated plan for total control. As I looked at the external sharing logs, I saw that the data was being sent to a third party. It wasn't just Evelyn. It was a security firm. They were building a complete profile of our daily lives. They knew when I left the house, when I came home, and who I talked to. They were gathering evidence to use against me. I felt a cold realization wash over me. This toy was a weapon designed to steal my daughter. The data logs showed that the information was being shared with a legal team specializing in high-conflict custody cases. My in-laws weren't just spying. They were preparing for a war I didn't even know I was in. The sun was starting to come up when I finally confronted Mark. I threw the recording device and the GPS tracker onto the bed. He sat up, blinking in the early morning light. "What is this?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. I played the recording of his mother coaching Maya. I showed him the tracking maps. He didn't look shocked. He looked annoyed. "Clara, you're overreacting," he said, standing up. "My mom just wanted updates. She worries about Maya's safety because you're always so scattered. It's just a way for her to feel connected. She told me she was going to add some safety features." I stared at him, unable to believe what I was hearing. Safety features. "Mark, she's tracking our daughter's every breath and telling her I'm dangerous. You knew about this." He sighed and walked toward the bathroom. "I knew she wanted to keep an eye on things. I didn't think it was a big deal. You're the one making it a crime." That betrayal hit me harder than anything else. My own husband had helped his parents turn our home into a surveillance zone. At that moment, I realized I couldn't trust him. I took a deep breath and made a quiet, firm decision. I wasn't going to scream anymore. I was going to fight. I spent the next few hours putting the toy back together perfectly. I wiped my eyes and put on a mask of calm. When Evelyn called later that morning to check in, I didn't yell. I used my sweetest voice. "Oh, Evelyn, thank you so much for the doll. Maya just loves it. I think you were right, she was just overstimulated at first. She's much better now." I could almost hear Evelyn smirking through the phone. She sounded smug, confident that she had won. "I'm so glad to hear that, dear," she said. "I knew you'd see reason eventually." She was so careless, so sure of her power over me, that she didn't notice the change in my tone. Mark seemed relieved that the drama was over. He acted like everything was back to normal, kissing me before he left for work. As soon as the front door clicked shut, I grabbed my keys. I called a professional tech specialist I had found online. I needed a witness who wasn't me. I needed someone who could testify to what was inside that toy. I drove Maya to a friend's house for a playdate, making sure to leave the doll at home so they couldn't track where I was going. I met the tech specialist, a man named Marcus, in a quiet office. He took one look at the doll and the device I had removed. He spent an hour running tests and looking at the software. When he finished, he looked at me with a grim expression. "This is bad, Clara," he said. "This device doesn't just record, it broadcasts live. It violates multiple state and federal privacy laws. And because it was given to a child for the purpose of tracking and recording her mother without consent, it falls under several child protection and stalking statutes." He explained that this wasn't a gray area or a misunderstanding. It was a serious criminal offense. He printed out a formal report, signed it, and stamped it. "You need to take this to the authorities immediately," he advised. "This isn't a family dispute. It's a crime." I felt a sense of validation but also a new kind of fear. Taking this to the police meant there was no going back. It meant the end of my marriage and the start of a public battle. I looked at the report in my hands. I knew I had to do it for Maya. She deserved a mother who wouldn't let her be a pawn in a grandmother's twisted game. Before I went to the police station, I wanted one final piece of undeniable proof. I went back home and set the doll on the kitchen counter. I knew they were listening. I made a fake phone call, standing right next to the toy. "I can't believe it," I said into the dead phone. "I just won the lottery. I'm taking Maya and moving to Europe tomorrow morning. I've already bought the tickets. We're leaving at 8 a.m. I hung up and waited. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 2 hours later, Evelyn called Mark's cell phone. I could hear her screaming through the receiver even from the other room. She was panicking, demanding to know why I was taking her granddaughter to Europe. She repeated the exact words I had said, almost verbatim. Mark looked at me, confused and angry. What is she talking about, Clara? Are you moving? I just looked at him and smiled a cold, sad smile. How does she know what I said in my kitchen, Mark? I wasn't on the phone with her. The realization finally hit his face, but it was too late. I had proof of live monitoring. I grabbed the doll, the report, and my purse. I walked into the police station with my head held high. I spoke to an officer named Sergeant Miller. I showed him the doll, the hidden compartment, and the specialist's report. At first, he looked skeptical, like he had seen too many family squabbles. But as he listened to the recordings of Evelyn coaching Maya and saw the GPS logs of the school, his face hardened. This is a serious invasion of privacy, he said. He called in a detective from the Child Computer Crimes Unit. They took the device very seriously, especially given Maya's age and the clear intent to use the data for legal leverage. They began a formal investigation. They took my statement, which took hours. I told them everything. The favoritism, the manipulation, and Mark's complicity. They told me that because the device was illegally modified, it was a felony. This was no longer just a family matter. It was an official criminal investigation. I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in years, someone was actually listening to me. As I left the station, Sergeant Miller told me they would be reaching out to Mark for cooperation. I knew the storm was just beginning, but I finally had an umbrella. When I got home, the house exploded. Mark was waiting for me, and his parents were already there, sitting in my living room like they owned it. They were beyond angry. They were filled with a cold, vibrating rage. How dare you? Evelyn hissed, standing up. You're ruining this family over a misunderstanding. We were trying to protect Maya from your instability. Arthur stood beside her, his face purple. Mark stepped toward me, his voice low and demanding. Clara, go back to the station and withdraw that report right now. You're making a fool of yourself and hurting my parents. Do you have any idea what this will do to their reputation? I stood my ground. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I looked them all in the eye and said, I'm not withdrawing anything. You spied on my daughter. You used her as a tool to attack me. It's over. They started screaming then, calling me names and threatening to take everything I owned. I just walked past them, went into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. I was calm and unshaken. I knew the police were already scheduling interviews. The wall of silence they had built around Maya was finally falling down. The following Monday, the interrogation began. I wasn't there, but my lawyer gave me the updates. Evelyn was brought in for questioning. At first, she tried her usual routine. The sweet, concerned grandmother who just loved her family too much. But the detectives were professionals. They played the recordings for her. They showed her the technical evidence that the device was shared with a security firm. Evelyn started to crack. Her justification was chilling. She told the detectives, I needed to protect my grandchild from her mother. Clara isn't fit to raise Brooks. She's too weak. I had to gather proof so the child could have a proper life with us. She didn't even realize she was admitting to a crime. She thought her status and her love made her untouchable. She even admitted to paying a technician to modify the toy. The detective asked her if she thought tracking a child's every move was healthy. She just looked at him and said, it was necessary. They informed her that charges were being discussed with the district attorney. The perfect Evelyn Brooks was finally being seen for who she really was, a manipulative stalker who used a child as a weapon. The fallout was immediate. Child Protective Services became involved. Because of the evidence of psychological manipulation and illegal surveillance, they issued a temporary order. Evelyn and Arthur were restricted from any unsupervised access to Maya. They were banned from her school and our neighborhood. Mark didn't handle it well. He was caught between his loyalty to his parents and the reality of the situation. He told me he was moving out to think. He packed a bag and left, probably to stay at his parents' house. For the first time in days, the house was quiet, truly quiet. Maya started to change. Without the doll watching her, she began to speak again. It was slow at first. She would ask for a snack or tell me about a drawing. She didn't mention the doll, and I didn't bring it up. We spent hours just sitting together, reading books and playing in the garden. I could see the light returning to her eyes. She was healing piece by piece. But I knew the final battle was still ahead. Mark had to make a choice, and I had a feeling I already knew what it would be. I was right. A week later, Mark made his final betrayal. He appeared on a local news segment, standing with his parents. He looked into the camera and claimed that I was mentally unstable, and that the whole police report was a fabrication born out of my own paranoia. He said his parents were the victims of a bitter, confused woman, who wanted to destroy a loving family. He publicly sided with the people who had spied on our daughter. I didn't respond emotionally. I didn't post a long rant on social media. Instead, I called my lawyer and responded legally. We submitted our own court filings for a formal separation and a custody hearing. We included the police reports, the tech specialist's testimony, and every single audio file I had downloaded. I wasn't going to let him control the narrative anymore. I realized then that Mark wasn't just a husband who was caught in the middle. He was an enabler who had chosen his parents' control over his own child's safety. The court date was set. I was ready to show the world the evidence dump that would change everything forever. The courtroom was cold and silent as we presented our case. My lawyer was methodical. We didn't just tell the story, we showed it. We played the recordings of Evelyn telling Maya that I was angry and unstable. We showed the data logs that proved they were tracking her every move. We presented the texts between Mark and his mother where they discussed the extra features of the toy. The narrative flipped instantly. The bitter woman's story Mark had tried to tell fell apart under the weight of the facts. The judge's face remained stone-faced as he listened to Evelyn coaching a 9-year-old to keep secrets from her mother. The in-laws sat at their table, looking smaller than I had ever seen them. Mark wouldn't even look in my direction. When we finished, there was a long silence. The judge cleared his throat and looked directly at Evelyn and Arthur. "This is one of the most disturbing cases of family interference I have ever seen," he said. He didn't just rule on the immediate issue. He spoke about the long-term damage they had caused. I held my breath, waiting for the final decision that would determine our future. The consequences were severe. The judge issued a permanent restraining order against Evelyn and Arthur. They were ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from Maya at all times. Evelyn faced legal penalties for the illegal surveillance and was ordered to pay a heavy fine and undergo mandatory counseling. The judge also turned his attention to Mark. Because of his complicity and his public attempts to gas-print me, the judge denied his request for joint custody. He was granted only supervised visitation, which would be monitored by a court-appointed professional. He lost the custody privileges he thought were his birthright. His parents' house, once a fortress of power, was now a place of legal shame. I walked out of that courtroom alone, but I felt more free than I had in years. I didn't have a husband and I didn't have in-laws, but I had my daughter and I had the truth. As I stood on the courthouse steps, I watched them drive away in their expensive car. They had all the money in the world, but they couldn't buy their way out of the consequences of their own cruelty. The months that followed were about healing. Maya went to therapy and so did I. We talked about boundaries, trust, and how it's okay to tell the truth even when people tell you to keep secrets. Slowly, Maya's laughter returned. She started making friends at school again and her grades went back up. She was confident and happy, a far cry from the silent girl clutching a plastic spy. We moved to a smaller house in a different neighborhood, a place that was ours and ours alone. The toy was gone, destroyed by the police as part of the evidence. I made sure our new home was a sanctuary of safety and peace. One afternoon while Maya was at a birthday party, I received a message on my phone. It was an email from a stranger who had seen the news reports about the case. They told me that my story had given them the courage to speak up about their own family's control issues. It was the first of many such messages. I realized that by fighting for Maya, I had inadvertently started a conversation that needed to happen. Just when I thought it was truly over, Evelyn tried one last move. A thick, cream-colored envelope arrived in the mail. It was a letter from her, handwritten in her perfect script. On the surface, it sounded apologetic. She wrote about how much she missed Maya and how her intentions were always pure. She claimed she was just a grandmother who lost her way. But underneath the sweet words, the manipulation was still there. She hinted that if I dropped the restraining order, she would ensure Maya's financial future was secure. She was still trying to buy her way back into our lives. She was still trying to control us with money and guilt. I read the letter twice. Then I walked over to the paper shredder and watched it turn into tiny white strips. I didn't respond. I didn't call her. I didn't give her the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. I did something much better. I took the letter to my lawyer to add to the file of her continued attempts at contact. I was done being a victim of her love. I decided to reclaim the narrative once and for all. I sat down and wrote my story. Every detail, every recording, and every betrayal. I shared it publicly on a platform for family advocacy. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't need to. The truth was shocking enough on its own. Within hours, the post went viral. Support poured in from all over the country. People were outraged by the spy toy and the parents who enabled it. I saw thousands of comments from people who had experienced similar types of control disguised as love. It was a powerful feeling to know I wasn't alone. The story reached the local news again, but this time the focus was on the importance of child privacy and the dangers of toxic family dynamics. I saw a clip of Mark watching the news in a coffee shop. He looked old and tired, staring at the screen as his own betrayal was discussed by the commentators. He was powerless to stop the truth from spreading. I had taken the power they used to silence me and turned it into a voice for others. Few weeks later, Mark showed up at my door. He didn't have his parents with him this time. He looked ashamed and alone. He told me he had been living in a small apartment and that his parents were constantly fighting about the legal fees. He said he regretted everything. "I should have stood by you, Clara," he whispered. "I see now how wrong they were. Can we just try to be a family again? For Maya." I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't feel anger. I just felt pity. He was a man who had never learned how to be a man, only a son. "Mark," I said firmly, "you had 18 years to stand by me. You had every chance to protect our daughter, but you chose them every single time. You didn't just lose me. You lost the right to be her father in the way you want." He tried to argue, but he had no strength left. He was powerless against the boundaries I had built. I listened to him for a few more minutes. Then I simply said no. I closed the door on him, and for the first time I didn't look back to see if he was still there. A year passed. Maya had another school milestone. Her middle school orientation. We had a small celebration at home with a few of her close friends. I gave her a small, simple gift. A beautiful leather journal. "No cameras, no strings, just a place for your thoughts," I told her. She hugged me tight, her laughter ringing through the house. There was no gold paper, no expensive tech, just pure joy. Later that week, I saw her on stage at the school's talent show. She stood confidently under the lights and spoke clearly into the microphone, telling a story she had written herself. She wasn't silent anymore. She was a leader, a girl who knew her own voice was her greatest power. I sat in the audience, watching her, and I felt a deep sense of pride. We had built a new tradition, one based on trust, honesty, and real love. I reflected on the long journey we had taken. We had survived the most dangerous gift, and we had come out stronger on the other side. As I tucked Maya into bed that night, I looked at her empty bookshelf where the doll used to sit. The room was filled with the soft glow of a regular nightlight. I realized that the most important lesson I learned wasn't about toys or tracking devices. It was about the nature of control. My in-laws thought they could own us because they had the money and the name. They thought secrets were a form of love. But true love doesn't need to hide in a hidden compartment. True love doesn't need to track your every move or coach you on what to say. It took a tragedy to see it, but I finally understood the chilling truth that had almost destroyed my family. The most dangerous gifts don't come with instructions, I thought as I turned off the light. They come with control disguised as love. Maya was safe now. She was free. And as I walked down the hallway of our peaceful home, I knew that I was free too. The silence was finally gone, replaced by the beautiful, messy, and honest sound of a life truly lived.